I keep getting asked, what books would you recommend in finding out more about the Arab world and its history? It's a tough question. Arab history is so complicated and perplexing, as its history is characterized by many invading empires, the birth of several religions, being the trading crossroads of expanding ancient civilizations, the birthplace of an advanced and enlightened moment in the Middle Ages, an occupation by a non-Arab Muslim caliphate for over half a millennium, and finally another colonial occupation by various Western superpowers over the last 2 centuries. Busy was an understatement when it came to the Arab world. So how does one go about shortlisting books that can best inform a curious mind as to the happenings of the past, the reasons for such actions, and how these historic actions have impacted subsequent Arab generations up to the present day? That's what it's all about, isn't it? Discovering the past to know better the present, and ultimately have some understanding of what the future might have in store for us. I personally have a tough time myself coming to terms with which books represent an accurate depiction of Arabs, what to trust and what not to, which source is non-bias, but one that exudes credibility in its relaying of history and the subsequent analysis that comes with it. And even then, one has to be conscious of the way history is being told along the ages. From what was the pure documentation of wars, key events, and personas in antiquity, to later iterations of the telling of history that incorporated the sociological factors impacting the past, and also acknowledging overlaid political bias and agendas. So what we need to consider is that even history needs to be assimilated with a pinch of salt. To be able to recommend books about Arabs, though, one has to provide some explanation as to the fabric of their history. First of all, Arab history has always been synonymous with Islamic history. This, although a very strong bond, doesn't reflect accurately the historic phases of Arab progress. Before Islam, Arabs indeed did have their own existence. They had their own past and present, but without much recorded history in any real sense. What remains is mostly stories from archaeological etchings or from subsequent Arab historians much further down the line in the future, as well as the contemporaneous works generated by non-Arab scholars. And hence, this era let's refer to as the Pre-Islamic Arab history, a timeline roughly from the 1st millennium BCE to the middle of the 1st millennium CE. At this time in history, works didn't generally deal with one specific people or civilization either, but dealt with all that was known, a telling of history at the time, without conjecture of what might have happened before it. And to further clarify, mainly from the perspectives of Greeks and Romans, about themselves. Anyone outside the space and periphery was of minor interest and value. And since it's the written form we're focusing on, who were the key contemporary figures that wrote about the Arabs in such an era? This would include the father of history, Herodotus, in the 5th century BCE, who in his writings, histories, revealed certain traits of Arabs such as their commitments towards a code of honor or about their enterprise in the trade of goods such as frankincense, myrrh, and spices. Or it was Strabo in his book Geographica in the 1st century current era, after his research at the library in Alexandria, that explained the various Arab peoples who resided along, as he termed it, the Arabian Gulf, that was later to be renamed as the Red Sea. Or with the lost works of Malchus, an Arab himself, who in the 5th century current era wrote an extensive treatise that only survived in smaller parts through future historical records such as the Excerpta by Constantine VII. And finally, in the book by Procopius, History of the Wars, written in the 6th century that provided detailed geographic accounts of the Arab region. To be honest, this phase of Arab history we know little about. The references in the historical accounts listed just now mention Arabs in short bursts and spurts. Rarely is it a comprehensive understanding that is provided, and the analysis given is usually with much misguided innovation and at times ignorance. The next clear-cut era for Arabs is with the birth of Islam, and in the witnessing along the ages of the faith's expansion into a vast empire, and then subsequently breaking up into many other smaller dynasties. We know this era as the Middle Ages, and this phase can be clearly dated from the 6th century all the way to the 14th century. In this era is when the history of the Arabs intertwines for the next millennium and a half with Islam. The written sources within this time period were abundant and rich, and as witnessed by the progress of humanity, the quantity and quality of the documentation of history took on new levels by those who were both Arabs as well as non-Arab. In this era, though, we start to witness great divides within the narratives being relayed. From the Arab perspective, the recounting of the nascency of Islam onwards towards the Rashidun Caliphates, then the Umayyad, Abbasid, and beyond, drew much inspiration from the telling of detailed accounts relaying history as it was known for those contemporary historians. Whereas in other cases, Arab histories were told and retold with bias, in the glorification of leaders, as benefaction for dynasties, and even in the justification of certain religious doctrine. Although not written, the Quran is the most important book presented to humanity. The Quran, of course, offers some historical recollection, yet what it does even more elaborately is reveal the behavior, beliefs, and actions of Arabs at the time. History of the Kings and Prophets by Abu Ja'far Muhammad al-Tabari in the 9th century retells the story of the creation and concludes during the lifetime of its author. The Meadows of Gold and Mines of Gems by al-Mas'udi in the 10th century follows the same structure as the history of al-Tabari. It expands into the era of the Abbasid Caliphate. Then we're given Ibn Kathir's Al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, the beginning and the end, and culminating with the Al-Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century, that introduces not only a recollection of Arab and Muslim events or personalities, but brings about the societal and psychological reasonings behind the actions and events taken throughout history. Non-Arab writings such as by Greek, Roman, Spanish, and Syriac authors also existed. Not quite the same quantity, yet still did provide great insight into the contemporaneous history of Arabs during this era. These accounts, though, followed a similar trend, one that was overwhelmingly antagonistic to the Arab narratives, where Islam was generally categorized as a faith of heathens and barbarians. And why? Well, first, due to the birth of a new religion that was now overwhelming both the East and West, conquering the Sasanian and the Byzantine Empire. Second, because the Arabs represented the defenders of Jerusalem and the main enemy during the Crusades. And thirdly, because the Arabs had invaded and occupied the Iberian Peninsula for many centuries. The agendas were clear: to discredit the people, first and foremost by attacking their faith, and then by dehumanizing them. Non-Arab history books of this era include the anonymously written Teaching of Jacob in the 7th century, with its significantly altered presentation of Islam, the Synopsis of Histories by Ioannis Skylitis in the 11th century that, for the first time ever, depicted visualizations of Arabs as they interacted with the Byzantines, the Historia by William of Tyre in the 12th century that began with the Muslim history of the Rashidun Caliphates up until the story of the Crusades, and finally the Historia Arabum by Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada in the 13th century that focused on the invasion of the Muslims into the Iberian Peninsula and then their eventual expulsion. At the beginnings of the modern era, for Arabs, a new convolution arises, that of becoming the vassals of the Ottoman Empire. And histories again get all mixed up between ethnicities, cultures, and language, all under the guise of a unified Muslim nation. Arab history, by association, becomes one with Ottoman history. Yet there were still isolated beacons that recorded history specific to Arabs, such as as-Suyuti's History of the Caliphs in the 16th century, Muhammad ibn Iyas's Bada'i' al-Zuhur fi Waqa'i' al-Dhuhur, Flowers in the Chronicles of the Ages, also in the 16th century, that documented the entry of the Gunpowder Age into Arabian warfare, and Ahmed al-Maqari's Nafh al-Tib, the Scented Breeze in the 17th century, that was a memorial to the glorious past of Al-Andalus. The Ottomans would also have their own historians tell the tale of Arabia. But these renditions would strictly focus their recordings on the events surrounding the geographical exposure of their empire, such as in the Fertile Crescent as well as in Egypt. Ottoman history would also be limited to shorter contemporaneous biographical encyclopedias of the leadership and ruling elite within the Ottoman hierarchy. Two prime examples of these history books are Lutfi Pasha's History of the Ottomans in the 16th century, that documented the history of the Ottoman Empire and the exploits of Suleiman I in Syria and Egypt, and Tarikh Naima, Annals of the Turkish Empire by Mustafa Naima in the 18th century. Thereafter, this Ottoman convolution turned into European colonialist domination that in many cases reinvented the image of Arabs as backward and heretical. Orientalist history was born, bringing back with it the impressions that the Crusaders had of Arabs. Western historians who reflected this superiority approach included Simon Ockley, who wrote the history of the Saracens in the early 18th century, depicting Islam and Arabs as respectively heresy and heretics, or Richard Francis Burton, who wrote First Footsteps into East Africa in 1856 that positioned Arabs as savages, and hence beneath Europeans. Fortunately for Arabs, Abd al-Rahman al-Jabarti's Ajaib al-Athar fi al-Tarajim wal-Akhbar, the marvelous compositions of biographies and events in 1821, countered the French narrative of the Napoleonic conquests in Egypt and the Levant, whereas Johann Ludwig Burckhardt's travels in Syria and the Holy Land in 1822 provided an intimate understanding of the Arab traditions and way of life. This, in turn, launches the Renaissance of Arabs, the Al-Nahda, in the mid-19th century, when identity and history begin to take a much stronger meaning for the Arab people. This was reflected with Rifa'a Tahtawi, the main intellectual of the Arab Renaissance, in his historical account أنوار توفيق الجليل في أخبار مصر وتوثيق بني إسماعيل. Tawfiq al-Jalil's insights into Egypt's history and that of Ismail's descendants, written in 1868, as well as Butrus al-Bustani's Da'irat al-Ma'arif, the first modern encyclopedia published in Arabic in 1875. Thereafter, the colonialists would pull a change of heart towards the Arabs, and by then exhibited a new level of respect for them, attempting to lure them away from the Ottoman alliances through an infusion of the concept of nationalism and rebellion, thereby creating dissonance between the Ottomans and Arabs at every opportunity. The Desert and the Sown by Gertrude Bell in 1905, followed by T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom, are prime examples of historic accounts that appear to present a sympathetic voice towards the Arab people and their cause. Yet the same authors played an important role and part of imperialist ambitions at the time. And by the 20th century, the rediscovery of Arab identity and the creation of Arab nation-states fully come into play. But world wars, the fall of empires, a race for the control of global energy, as well as that of a struggle for geopolitical domination in the Cold War, disturb the flow of the fate of nations, especially the Arabs, again, who become the playing ground of global powers. And it's in this period we witness historians from all walks of life, Westerners who prioritize political agendas over that of truly documenting histories, while others, Arabs, who attempt to reflect a version of history they have lived with and experienced, past and present. A concoction of generated histories that would challenge any and all to derive a clear understanding of what was wrong and what was right about Arab history. These include the Lebanese teacher Georgi Zaidan with his History of Arabic Literature in 1913, History of the Arabs by another Lebanese, Philippe Hitti in 1937, H. Gibbs and Harold Bowen's Islamic Society in the West in 1954, The Crusades Through Arab Eyes by Amin Ma'louf in 1983, A History of Arab Peoples by Albert Hourani in 1991, and finally, Bernard Lewis's What Went Wrong in 2002. The mentions of all these books are not an exhaustive list by any means, and as modernity approached, history books about Arabs erupted in quantity, type, and source. The books I listed are simply to give you an idea of the types of books available in each era, offering a diverse vantage point of historical elaboration. Yet no one book can provide that full and comprehensive understanding of Arab history through and through. And that's why breaking history down into separate phases while shining a light on who the generators of such histories were was a necessary strategy. One of my favorite professors in architectural school once said to me, "Throughout your life, Tariq, you'll only need 20 feet in length of books." I never truly grasped what he meant for me to understand. My takeaway, though, was that there is a limit to the amount of books you need and keep throughout life. Choose them well, so that every time you return to them, new knowledge is discovered, again and again. So, on that note, if I were to borrow 1 foot of those 20 feet in your life, 5% of your lifetime's library, even less than that, and one designated for a curiosity in Arab history, my recommendations would be as follows. Arabia and the Arabs by Robert Hoyland that elaborates on pre-Islam Arabia in comprehensive detail. The Quran, a verse translation, is the book of wisdom and guidance, the spark that triggered the fusion of Islam and Arabs. Al-Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun that not only told of Arab and Muslim history, but redefined how history would beyond then be told. Orientalism by Edward Said that explained how the Occident manipulated history and narratives in relaying the Arab story. And last but not least, Eugene Rogan's The Arabs, a History, that tells of the Arab world's past from the height of the Ottoman Empire to the present day. History and its telling seemed extremely concrete, that it was a series of indisputable facts that persevered over time. Later in life, that concrete turned out to be much more like jelly. Much of history was represented by someone conveying history in a way that suited them best. And it's up to the reader to identify and discern the well-founded and sourced from which isn't. The highly plausible versus that based on conjecture or agendas. For Arabs, their history books operated pretty much in the same way, whether written by Arab scholars or by foreign pens, by those who attempted to be as honest as possible and those who didn't. So on that note, if you were asked that same question in recommending a book or two on Arab history, which would you recommend?